We've given you a series of rationale statements in your handout. You can come to those in a minute, but I'll just set the scene. So what we'd like you to do at your tables is to divide up those rationale statements and then read it really thoroughly and kind of feed back into the table discussion. The thing we'd like you to pay attention to is the general gist of these statements and what sort of messaging there is, and also the kind of language that they're expressed in. So have a good look at the ideas, the rationales, the justifications, the arguments, but also the kind of language that is used and how it's couched in these statements. And then we'd like you to think about how convincing is it. Obviously, we're fairly persuaded in this room by some of those statements, but again, with a view to our students, but also the wider community. And are these the same sorts of arguments that you're used to, the sorts of language and arguments that you're used to in your own context, that you're used to hearing, or that you have actually used yourselves?
Where do you guys at your table actually stand? Do you accept them?
Well, I think we would look at it on balance and see what's relevant to us in each of those statements, in each of those policies. What is it that we can take from it?
Yeah.
Because we are connected to other countries. We do need to think about languages on an international level. But we also need to make it specific to our context. So what is it that we can take from those international documents and make it relevant to our students?
We can do exactly as Gosha says and take pieces from the different rationales and enhance our work. But where do you actually stand? Where have you landed on thinking through when you've done the balancing up of all of these discussions and debates? As Gosha is saying, you know, we have to balance it up all the time. It depends on who we're speaking to. It depends on what argument we're putting forward. It depends. And when all is said and done, it'd be great to hear where have some of you landed.
We had a range of discussions in our table. The rationale why languages, I guess, catering for different motivations and reasons why the students may be doing a language is critical to acknowledge not only the diversities, but also why they're there, why they want to be there, and to respect that. So I was sharing that I had some students that were amazing. They did everything right, but they didn't want to really learn the language. They just wanted to get a good score in Year 12. And heartbreaking as it was, and I was trying to convince them that they were so close to that breaking point that they could become speakers of Spanish. They were not interested. They just wanted to do well. So that's on one side of the spectrum. The other side is those kids that discover, and I think Japanese is a great example, that curiosity for the Japanese culture and the way of thinking that motivates them. And they might not be very academic, but they like it. So I think as teachers, being able to recognize and to accept that they may not have the same motivation that you had many years ago to learn a language is still a valid reason. Because if we are not connected to that, then it becomes a bit of a problem.
In actual fact, in our group, we all did a summary of each of the papers and then gave a report. There seemed to be threads across it, and I think that we all actually felt that it was tired, dead, boring, and we wouldn't buy it.
That's a provocation for everyone.
We would ask, and it's and that we should ask ourselves, how do we make language alive? How do we bring spirit? How do we creatively market it? all of us have been touting all these basic rationales for the past 20 to 30 years. And they're dead. It's dead theatre. And what I think we're actually talking about when we're turning languages, that we should think back to our own childhoods and the magic and mystery of another culture, and which was seemed to be so relevant to me as a Eurasian child, being born in Australia, and asking myself why I'm here. Why am I here? How did I get here? I didn't want to be here. Why aren't I blue-eyed and wonderful like everybody else in the community? So what I thought, and this set me on a path of examining my own identity and having a fascination for the Italian people in the community and my best mates who came from different cultural backgrounds, and going into their homes, sharing their food, sharing their language, learning, and it all seems so much more colourful and exotic and beautiful than sort of roast lamb on a Sunday in our very Anglo home, despite the fact that there was quite a Chinese factor happening. But I think that it is personalisation, making it real, bringing magic, unlocking the secrets to another universe. That is so important, and that's why we teach languages.
For me, in thinking through my dilemma at Salisbury East, I really started to think about the here and now of those kids' lives, and what is it that through their language learning, yes, it was Indonesian, yes, they were learning about the distinctiveness of Indonesia and so on, but the transferable knowledge, the knowledge, if you like, that they were going to take away, that knowledge and capacity to navigate linguistic and cultural diversity. And I think for me, that's a fundamental kind of disposition that I wanted to develop in my students. They may go away and forget Indonesian or forget, those words that I taught them on Friday afternoon or whatever, but I hope that they carry that sensitised perspective, if you like, for thinking about language, culture and meaning and their identity in that. Because I was just noticing that you were talking about identity, and I know that in our language classrooms, often students find a home where they feel that they sort of belong to a group of people who are like-minded, particularly more in the senior years as they choose to be there. But you're also highlighting this sense of their connection with the language program and with that sort of identity that is being offered to them as offering other ways that they can be. And sometimes for our students, they'd like to not step out of, but maybe expand who they can be. And the language program offers them a chance to do that. Some of the work that's happening in Europe, the work of Michael Byram in particular, for those of you who maybe have engaged with some of the intercultural work, he's been very crucial in that area. They're working on something called intercultural citizenship. And it's very much about using the language learning that they're doing, so it is still a use kind of orientation, but for some sort of social good or for some sort of, humanistic purpose. And so there's a lot of work. If people are interested, I can point you to this work. But they're trying, again, struggling with the rationale. Where are we taking young people through our languages education? And they are sort of working in this area of the citizenship use, not just for communication of any sort, but very much for ethical, political kind of action, even with quite young learners. And, for people working in Spanish, lots of work coming out of South America in this area as well. Again, it may not necessarily be most relevant for our context here. They're post-colonial societies and so on in South America. They've very much picked up on this big time, and it sort of works for them. But again, interesting to note that conversations are being had around the globe around what are we doing this for and so on. Okay, to Liam.
Yep, it's a bit like, these are written papers that are great for, ministers, other teachers, principals, leaders, those sorts of things to read. But what about who's actually going to be receiving that rationale? What about the students? What about the language that we all have this passion. We can talk to kids and be like, yeah, it's good for your cognitive needs. What does that mean? What's that going to mean to a year one? You know what I mean? Oh, yeah, I need some cognitive needs right after I've had my recess. Having like those rationales, and I suppose that's the other bit. Our passion is there, but we need to kind of incorporate it in a way where we can impart that onto the people who are receiving these rationales. So I'm different to George. I was not brought up with this richness of culture. I didn't dream of Indonesia as a kid. I just did well at it in primary school. And then I did it at university, and I did good at Indonesian in university. And then I was like, well, I'm going to be a language teacher. And then when I read about language teaching, I am that person who's, I'm a sucker for that rationale. I'm like, yeah, that's good. But we do need to, I suppose, get better at presenting it to the kids to really sell it to them. You sold it to them, now we need to get good at selling it to them. So, yeah.
Yeah, if I could just pick up on a couple of points you've raised there, Liam. Indonesian for you wasn't about learning this language so that one day I can go and negotiate a contract in Indonesia or whatever, or even just go to Bali and travel and whatever. It was, I'm good at this thing right here and now. I'll just keep going a bit more. I'll keep going a bit more. And before you knew it, you had invested long term and you didn't want to give up that investment, clearly. So this notion of feeling satisfied and feeling rewarded for what you're doing in the here and now. And I think, if kids feel that they're learning something meaningful to them in the here and now, that is, for me at least, a more convincing rationale for them than maybe one day in the future, if you blah, blah, blah. All that sort of hypothetical. Yeah.
It's too remote, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's far too remote. Liam reminded us of the receivers of our message, as we're going to see in a moment, and not just the kids, though. There are others who are receivers of the message. On the Milk Committee, our receiver is the minister. It's a different kind of talk in that arena. You've got parents, you've got fellow colleagues in your curriculum committees and so on. Those are also receivers of the message. And so the tailoring that we have to do in order to chime in with the particular audience at the time, and fundamentally asking ourselves, which ones of these rationales do you buy yourself? Which ones are you at home with? And which ones can you actually sell?
I can be Dick Van Dyke and I'll be very Anglo in my approach here and talk about Mary Poppins and come in and be exciting and woo, 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 because, I'm a knit teacher and I've got to, keep this show on the road. But, seriously, come to the Fringe show in January. No, just kidding. Engage the kids, engagement, excitement. No, give them purpose and tell them this is your job. This is what we're all here for. And this is about you learning to be a problem solver. Sorry. Getting them to reflect on why we're all in this classroom together, what opportunities, and it's not just about economic going to the Gold Coast opportunities or just about, being able to, sorry, I'm talking way too much.
Don't apologise. You're answering the question. I'll also add that in both your comment and yours, it became very personal very quickly. Show the passion. That is what is infectious. And where is the passion? Which ones of these documents give us that passion?
But if I can just add, when we get into the territory of passion, and over here we were talking about curiosity, And you talked about the magic and mystery. When we get into that sort of language, we find that there's a lot of discounting of that language. It's not in the education sort of discourses, it's all about cognition and very serious kind of things. And so when we raise these sorts of other emotional type dimensions to what we do, and there very much is, that's what my students were telling me clearly, that they were rejecting the kind of the connection with the language. They didn't see themselves in that language. When we're starting to talk in that territory, you can sort of see that, it's perhaps not part of the valued discourse in education. I think we need to, move it back in and get a place for it, and that we can say this is a distinctive part of what we do. We are on about curiosity, unlocking other worlds, mystery and intrigue, and solving the puzzles and so on. We want to tap into that sort of aspects of learning.
I mean, if there was more funding, then that would certainly make it, I think, we can have words of value, but if the value needs to be with the time, you don't become a quality athlete from running around the block once a day. Running around the oval once a week, It needs to be 4 or 5 lessons to get ongoing, lasting quality. And so the kids see that we're serious about it, not just saying nice things. We all have the best intentions here, but I think that's, we'd like to see some value, some outcomes like that, I think. Well, there's some solutions I've come across.
Okay.
Things like having language nights, and basically re-educate the parents for the values of languages. We've seen some benefits in our schools for that. I think colleagues are often our best resources, not just at these here, but on local areas, overseas trips. Carlos has been great for giving me some tips for that, with acceleration, ICT apps. My colleague Shane Peter, really big on space repetition. So that's lots of tangible things. There are lots of solutions out there, and I think we're in the best place here to get that from each other. So thanks very much.
Look, that's a wonderful sentiment, Simon, and what I can underline from this little segment, what Michelle and I had in mind, was to, on the one hand, recognise some of the issues that you've raised. They are there, and they are tough. What is really important is not only that we recognise what those issues are, but that we find resourceful ways, clever ways, of actually responding to these, not in any kind of defensive fashion. And this is where we get to the notion of how do we present our arguments, which has been part of the whole rationale thing and this segment here as well. How do we present our arguments to the various communities, the students, principal, as you were saying over here, the teachers, other colleagues? How do we present arguments in a way that is going to make sense for them and bring about some of the changes that we'd like to see? This array that you've given us today are really, really is really helpful. I love it.